Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad Podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets to help you on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I'm Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode. I am always excited about my guests that I'm having. And this year, I've actually loaded up, on guests to give me more of a ramp, so that I can slow down. And because I also started the second podcast that I'm also working on too, called Seasoned Conversations. But this is my baby, I Am Dad Podcast. And so I love running into and running across, others that are working specifically in the space of men and fatherhood, which is, my heart space. But seeing the great work that's taking place around the country and people who are advancing the conversation and advancing this work in meaningful ways, like our guest today, Dr. Darren Moore. He's a nationally recognized expert in men's mental health, marriage and family therapy, and fatherhood. As Associate Director of Clinical Training and Supervision and Clinical Professor at Northwestern University, Dr. Moore brings years of clinical, academic, and research experience to critical conversations about manhood, relationships, and identity. With a focus on obesity, addictions, family systems, and the unique mental health needs of men, Dr. Moore has taught over 50 courses, established widely, and served in leadership across top institutions and national boards. He is also a leading voice on fatherlessness and emotional lives of men and what it means to raise sons in today's world. Let's bring Dr. Moore to the stage. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm okay. I can't complain. Like I tell people, I got a good spades hand. I probably got 8. If I have the right partner, I probably could get 10 out of it, but 8's still good.
Definitely.
Eight's still good. Listen, Dr. Moore, we start our conversation off very uniquely because we love to hear a good story. And I don't set this up. You could tell it however you want to tell it, but we are always interested in hearing one's daddy story. What's your daddy story?
Okay. In terms of
Just it, whatever is your daddy story, however you want to tell it.
Okay.
From however you want to tell. You in the barbershop, you ain't asking the bros, hey, so what do you mean? This no, what's your daddy story?
Okay. I will say that well, I remember when my wife was pregnant, and we were trying to make sure that the pregnancy was going to be okay, asking all the questions, trying to make sure that we were paying attention to certain things, to make sure that we have a healthy process. And I would accompany my wife to the various medical appointments, meeting with specialists, so on and so forth. And I remember meeting a person, and they were talking about asking us if we wanted to do some kind of advanced testing before our child was born, and the person said, uh, "Are you the baby daddy?" And I sort of I sort of thought to myself, what exactly are you asking me? And I guess I understand that in this particular situation, maybe they weren't used to seeing someone come in with their husband into some of these appointments. And I felt offended, I felt slighted, and I thought it was quite interesting when we think about the conversation around Black men in particular and around fatherhood. When dealing with the medical community, sometimes they render us invisible, or sometimes they don't necessarily expect us to show up. And so that can be a bit of a challenge. So I thought that was quite interesting because I was thinking, Yeah, I am the baby daddy. I'm also the father. I'm also the husband. I've also been married for, over, 14 years. Like, sure, you know what I mean? But it wasn't, they weren't asking questions about that. They were asking if I was the baby daddy. So that's an interesting story. It's not necessarily funny, but it's an interesting story when we talk about the experiences that some men have when they're navigating the process of fatherhood, especially earlier in the process. And I think it's something that I continue to see as important, that we talk about as we think about how best to prepare fathers and their partners for parenthood.
Yeah, it's interesting that you took it from that perspective because that's why I don't prompt anybody when I say tell me your daddy story because everybody's daddy story is different. Some people want to tell me the story about their fathers or the absence of their fathers. Some people want to tell me about them being a father. Some people want to talk about, fathers in general. Your daddy story is your daddy story, right? But when you tell me your daddy story in a very weird and an ironic way, it tells me something about you, right? Because I notice your mind goes places when I say that. And so the question is, where does your mind go? And then where do you settle when you actually begin to start telling your daddy story? And what I love about what you just described is really in this space where we specifically as Black men and then men in general are still searching for our space in the space, right? And so, a space that people demand of us and want us to have responsibility, but don't really care about how we show up as long as we're showing up the way they want us to show up, right? And
Absolutely.
so, when you were going through that and thinking about that, what was it about? Because this is what I always trying to get at. Because when I hear people tell the story, you're also telling me something about your character, which is what is it about you that made you slow down enough to respond to it in a way that someone could hear you without mentally labeling you as just another angry man in the space that I need to get out of the way because we really ain't trying to serve him anyway.
Sure, that's a great question. I think one of the things that has been helpful for me has been just my overall experience in navigating these types of spaces, not necessarily in the personal life, but in my professional life, in working with medical doctors, nursing staff, and other professionals, and understanding that sometimes they also need to be educated, sometimes they also need to be informed. And so the interesting thing is that when I'm accommodating my wife to an appointment, I'm accommodating as a husband. I'm not really in teacher mode. I'm not thinking
Mm.
about the work I do at the university. And so I wasn't really thinking about uh, maybe I need to sort of explain this to them. But I also thought, I want to be very clear and provide an understanding to say, hey, I'm not sure exactly what you meant by the question, but here's how it landed. And here's my sort of response to that, because I think that I wanted to convey a message around the fact that as a father, um, I matter and I'm important and I'm here because I care about the process. And in particular, as I was mentioning, we were talking about a specific uh, exam and a test that potentially has a lot of ramifications. So I wanted to be a part of that decision making process as we were sort of navigating this new process for our family.
When you go through something like that, do you filter or is there a process in your mind that quickly happens, right? This ain't a process that happens for 5 minutes, 10 minutes when you're going through the scenario. We're talking about milliseconds that this happens in. Are you trying to determine in this moment, is this about me being a man or is this about me being Black?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in the moment, I may have a feeling or a thought process about what's behind it, but I'm not necessarily registering everything in that same moment. A lot of what happens for me is reflection. So the next day, the next week, I'm going back and I'm replaying that scenario,
Mm.
replaying every single detail. And then I'm having conversations with, my community, and saying, hey, I want to talk to you about this. Have you ever experienced this? And so I think in the moment I felt a certain way. Um, but I think later on it was about reflecting and sort of questioning, the intent. Was it stated with malicious intent? Was it just stated because a person might have been ignorant, or whether there was some other, reason why that was asked? And so in the moment, I have thoughts and perspectives, but I am typically a person that likes to reflect and think about things, critically analyze things before I come to any, significant conclusion.
Yeah. When you go in next time, do you kind of walk in with your proverbial hands balled up, or do you kind of go in a less relaxed mode and just kind of take what happens, or are you taking more of an offensive or a defensive posture?
That's a good question. I think that for me personally, even after that experience, I think I had to keep, my eye on the prize, which was really helping to make sure that my wife was able to deliver a healthy baby, right? And
Mm.
so, you know, um, did I feel defensive or offensive? I think mostly what I felt was an important need to be present, to be involved in the conversation, and to make sure that I have the ability to sort of weigh in on some of these things. I think that um, in some spaces, some of the medical community is not always used to fathers being involved all the time. I went to, probably 99% of the appointments. And so I wanted to know every single detail. I wanted to know what was happening, what kind of prenatal care was involved. I wanted to know about the procedures for labor and delivery, all of those things. And so mostly it was rooted in a desire to want to protect my wife.
Mhm.
And that's mostly because she's a Black woman. And if we know anything about the research on pregnancy and delivery for Black women, there are significant disparities regarding the pregnancy process and the labor and delivery process as well.
Yeah, there used to be an old school. I'm dating myself here, Dr. Moore. There used to be a commercial that used to come on for the hair club for men. And the guy used to come on and he used to always say, I'm not just the president, I'm a client. Like, how much of that experience intersects with your professional life where it's like, man, I'm teaching about this all day long and I think I got it and I still got to come out here and deal with it in my regular day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is the world we live in, and I think that it sort of enriches the work that I do, the teaching, when I'm at the university to be able to talk from a personal perspective. I think it also it sort of crystallizes the realities. It's one thing to hear about a story, right, or to hear about an anecdote that happened. It's another thing to like actually experience it,
Mhm.
and to walk away feeling like what do I do? And what are the things that are what are the mechanisms, the barriers that are set in place to create maybe a environment that's not necessarily healthy or conducive to trying to get through this process of transitioning to fatherhood. And so I think, it's one thing to understand something from a theoretical perspective. It's another thing to have those real lived experiences that you can draw from in your work.
Mhm. Being a clinical director, trainer, and training young and new minds in this space. Have we gotten better? Because I know that this was a huge issue when I was in New York. We did a lot of work going around the city to evaluate schools of social work to see whether or not in their curriculums and in their trainings were they talking any about men and fatherhood. When you think about it from your perspective, like Are we doing better in that space, or do we still have a long way to go to make sure that the issues of men are just as inclusive in the training of our new medical professionals as they need to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say both. I think we're probably doing better than before, but we are still far away from where we need to be. I know in my clinical training, I try my best to add conversations around men and mental health, and men's experiences in relationships, and it's something that I don't think is paramount in the work that we do in terms of being studied or being taught. And in addition to my current position, in the past, I've actually trained medical students, and there have definitely been some deficits in terms of training, what I would refer to as like culturally competent care, and that includes gender, and that includes working with men, and trying to make spaces inclusive of men when we're thinking about, um, really not only just this idea around transitioning to fatherhood, but also just in terms of health and wellness overall. I mean, when I think about this experience, um, in the literature we talk a lot about postpartum depression and things like that. We don't really circle back and ask fathers, hey, how are you doing as you're navigating this process? You just were a part of this major thing. How are you sort of navigating this new identity of being a father? How are you balancing it all with workplace, home life, or all the other things that just might come a part of life. And I think that that speaks to the importance and the need to have these conversations. So overall, I think we are doing better than maybe before, but there is still a significant need to continue to push the conversation further.
What's the obstacle? What's the thing that's making it slow to advance?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's a lot of different obstacles. I think one of the obstacles is when it comes to specifically with the mental health space. I think for some men, there's a difficulty to talk about it related to some of the larger societal narratives around what it means to ask for help. And so there's this piece around some men not feeling comfortable or safe with being able to ask for help, to reach out, whether it's reaching out to a peer, reaching out to a medical professional, a mental health professional. I think there's still some stigma around mental health, particularly as it relates to men. I definitely think that there are more conversations being had, in different spaces. But I still think that there's a need for even more conversations.
What was your journey into the space? Because this is a unique space. It's somewhat a new space where folks are, particularly men, are walking into their profession saying, I am narrowly focused on men's health and more specifically in some spaces, black men's health. But what was the thing that kind of said to you, you know what, Darren, this is where I'm going. This is what I want to do.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think, a lot of times we talk about how there's this sort of running joke. We say research is me search. And in many ways, we come to this place, to this space, to this work. It's typically a calling, right? And so when I think about my own family, and my own childhood, and thinking about the way that I was raised, one of the things that I noticed was that there's so much happening, in particularly to the black family system, societal influences, race, class, gender, so on and so forth. And I thought about how resilient the black family system is, and how important it is for us to have space to talk about our pain, our trauma, as we think about ways to overcome and to succeed in the midst of the chaos or other things that are happening. And so within my background, I've always been interested in learning about families and family studies. And then in my undergraduate experience, I majored in African American studies at the University of Minnesota. where we focused on the Black family system. And I kept thinking, there's so much that has happened over time to the Black family system. You can sort of understand how we are where we are today. And there's such a need for healing, for conversations, for forgiveness, for hope, and for thinking about ways to move forward to an even better and brighter future.
Yeah, I was scrolling the other day on one of these platforms, and I saw a picture of Claudine. I know you remember the movie Claudine with James Earl Jones and Diane Carroll, and it was the entire family, and they were walking down the street. And I just kind of stopped and I looked at that picture, and I was just looking at it, saying to myself, man, I wonder what this picture means to people. I wonder if they make a connect to what this movie was about and what it was trying to speak to. This year is also, and I speak about that only because this year is also the 60th anniversary of the Moynihan Report. And so those two things intimately connect for me from a historical perspective because of what the report spoke about with respect to Black families, but more specifically, what it talked about for Black men. Seems to me that we still haven't found a comfortable space to um, compartmentalize the conversation, I guess, somewhat separately, of women's health issues, men's health issues, and children's health issues. And then we haven't found a way to find a collective box to put all three of them in at the same time. And the reason I mentioned Claudine, because that's where I'm getting back to family, right? It seems like almost we're not having a family conversation today. We're only having a men's conversation, a woman's conversation, and a child's conversation. Is that something that you see in the space?
100%. I think, when I'm scrolling and I'm coming across various clips, various podcasts, that's exactly what's happening. There's not a shared space. It's a like you said, it's a male space or a space for women and a space for men, and maybe a space for children. And sometimes there are significantly opposing viewpoints, right?
Hmm.
And some conflict, and sometimes a lack of understanding, sometimes bashing, sometimes a lot of those things. But we do need to get back to the family, and to being able to have critical conversations with each other. And I think that one of the things that is important in the work that I do, because as a licensed marriage and family therapist, I do work with couples. I do work with families, and there are some that are actually willing to have these conversations, willing to work towards trying to improve their relationships, improve their communication, think about ways to work together as a team when it comes to parenting, marriage, for example, and or co-parenting, even if they're not married or even in a relationship. But in the social media space, for sure, there are lots of um, spaces where people are bantering and arguing and fighting about their particular points of view without always thinking about the other person's perspective. And not only just that, but thinking about how do we work together? How do we coexist? How do we work in a collaborative nature? And how do we work as a team?
Right.
As we're thinking about the Black family system.
Yeah, when you look at, the research still bears out that for the most part, our families are stable. But there's a small segment of the population that's unstable that garners the vast majority of the social media and the societal perception of who we are as a community and who we are as a family. But when you look at that small segment of the population, what tends to be the overarching issue that they're struggling with?
Yeah. Well, I think. part of the issue is particularly when we're talking about research is there is a there has been historically a overwhelming focus on deficit approach to looking at research. Okay, so what we know about research is um, every research question, there are hidden assumptions in that research question. Okay. So if I'm looking to understand a particular phenomenon, a particular issue, I'm already thinking something about it, whether it's my own personal hypothesis, whether it is something that I've read in previous research. I'm trying to confirm something. And so there has at least historically been a deficit approach when thinking about research, particularly on Black men
Mhm.
and men in general, I would say. And so when we think about that, then that's going to impact the outcome of the research, right? So in my work, what I've tried to do is I've tried to take a more strength focused approach when thinking about Black fathers. So when I'm asking questions, I'm asking them a certain way so that I can learn more about their experiences and their perspectives. So for me, for example, um, there's one way to ask a question is like, what are the barriers, right? That's one way to ask a question. Another way is, what do you need? What would be helpful for you? What are we not asking you that we need to be asking you?
Right.
Learning more about context, right? Because it's so easy to say that Black men are not present in their children's lives if you're collecting data that is based on maybe the marriage rate, right? But if we
Right.
look behind that and we know that Black men are very much involved in their children's lives, whether they're married or not, right? So it's about the questions that we're asking and then how we are going about getting the data. And I think that that's why there is a need for more people to do research on fatherhood and specifically Black fatherhood. But in addition to that, we have to have more of a strength based approach so that we're being able to balance out some of the deficit based approach that has been utilized historically.
Yeah. I often wonder because I spend my life around researchers. I'm not a researcher myself. I don't need to be one because I'm around enough of them to kind of know what is going on in their spaces. And I often wonder in this space of particularly fatherhood, are we continuing to ask questions to something we already know? So why are we continuing to try to prove what we already know? Why aren't we digging for things that we don't know, right? And so Dr. Mincy, Ron Mincy, who's a really good friend of mine, who was one of the pioneers and authors of the Fragile Family research, that's still kind of churning out information. But I'm wondering, and I've spoken to him, when is when is the new iteration of the Fragile Family Study going to happen? Because to your point about the premise of why it started at a place that is now 20 years ago. And we know enough about families now and the generational shifts today to know that children that are born today aren't the 20-year ago children. They are vastly different.
Mhm.
The perceptions of how we think about family is different. Attitudes with respect to men and women are different. Their perceptions with respect to how they see marriage as a benefit is different. How they accept cohabitation and shifting um, um, co-parenting responsibilities are different. Even the outcomes of child family court cases are shifting. They're not shifting fast, but they are definitely shifting. In our program, we are seeing more single fathers than we've ever seen with getting full custody of their children. And not because there's something going on with mom. She is just like, you know what? I'm trying to live my best life. Go with it. Go have it. So from the research perspective, like where are we and where do we need to shift in order to really find out what we need to learn about providing better solutions, at least for the children that are becoming childbearing ages?
Yeah, yeah.
I know that was a long question. That was deep. I hope I didn't lose
No,
you.
no. I think one of the things that you mentioned is related to the legal system, right? And
Mm,
so I think, as you mentioned, there have been some shifts that have emerged related to outcomes for child custody. Um, and I think there's a need for more of that as we think about ways to support fathers. And when I say more, I think what I'm really saying is more of a slant towards equity when it comes
mm,
to being able to think about um, the importance of what this is all about, which is rearing our children. I think one of the things that you're right. We've done a lot of research and we know a lot about what's happening, but for some reason there is a lack of sort of uptake of what do we do with this research and how do we use it to improve the outcomes. And so, in particular, I'm thinking about, I'm involved in lots of different groups online and things like that, and I'm constantly hearing about difficulties navigating the court system. I'm constantly hearing about issues around child support, for example. I mean, there's all these groups, and people are just having all these conversations, and I think that the needle is moving, but I think it still needs to continue to move as we think about what's most important. I think it seems to be that the focus on the child has been in some way like escapes us, and we haven't always focused in on what's most important. I think lots of times there's power involved, there's ego involved, there's maybe trauma involved. There's a lot of different things that are involved, and from my vantage point, there are a lot of fathers who are doing the best that they can, a lot of fathers that are working hard to support their families, and however they're not always recognized to the extent that they maybe should be.
One of the things I always remind myself of, or at least I try to remind myself of, I don't know how many other people actually kind of think about this, and that is that this work around men's health and more specifically fatherhood is a an extremely young discipline in the social work space, right? Really still in its infancy. There's no infrastructure around it, right? That's that's very different for women's issues. There is an infrastructure around women's issues where there are whole industries that are pointing to very small segments of women's issues. Therefore, they're able to concentrate on really small, direct things. It seems to me, Dr. Moore, that in the fatherhood space, men's space, that for the few of us around the country that are in this space, that we're constantly trying to stick our fingers in emerging dikes and stop the water from coming through. And we're finding ourselves having to do everything. Like when I read the bio and I was like, okay, he's in men's health, mental health, and family dynamics. That's a lot, right? And that encompasses a lot.
Mhm.
Typically, when you're talking about a women's issue, I can point to you the people who are in the women's health space, the people who are in the women's mental, and they don't cross it. They're focused.
Mhm.
The question is, how do we grow this space that we're in? How do we get more people who have a compassion for men to enter into spaces like wanting to be social workers, wanting to be researchers, wanting to be wanted to be in counselors, wanted to be those spaces that we know the pay is not where we're looking for it to be, but your heart's got to be there to want to kind of do that work. To me, that seems to be a challenge that we have not figured out yet.
Absolutely. I mean, part of what you mentioned is a problem that I would say is nationwide when we think about various the various mental health disciplines, for example, social work, marriage and family therapy, counseling, psychology. We know that there is a shortage of men who go into those professions, and myself, I have had lots of conversations with my peers and have been a part of different initiatives to try to shore up that pipeline of new individuals going into the profession, because we need to think about the future. And so I think that we have to continue to, number one, have conversations, and these conversations need to be public, they need to be private, they need to include a lot of different people, and we need to have them in many different facets. We need to have them on social media. We need to have them in the classroom. We need to have them in the clinical setting, because what we know is that this is extremely important. One of the reasons why I sort of have encompassed, a variety of sort of disciplines. The way that I sort of make sense of it is that, you know, individuals are shaped by their family systems,
Hmm.
period, right? And so when we think about a person that might have a history of being, marginalized, oppressed, disenfranchised, that have had different struggles and things like that, that's going to impact how they navigate the world. That's going to impact how they think about themselves. That's going to impact their own mental health and their psyche. That might impact their behaviors, which could also have implications on their health. And so mental health and physical health, it's one and the same in many aspects when we think about the correlations between depression, suicide, right, and chronic health conditions also, right? And so I think that that's part of sort of how I've navigated multiple spaces in terms of mental health and sort of the physical health standpoint, in trying to sort of think about, um, you know, men's health from a holistic and comprehensive perspective, because a lot of the connections are based on how we think about ourselves, how we feel
Hmm.
about ourselves, how we've been treated, and our own sort of internalization of some of those messages. And so that's the psychology piece. And so if I feel like I'm a bad person, if I feel like I'm a bad father, if I feel depressed, then I may show up like that, and I
Mm.
may, fall victim of some of those sort of societal perspectives. So I think that you can't talk about, men's health without talking about men's mental health, and you cannot talk about men's mental health without talking about men's health, because they are one and the same in my vantage point as I think about the mind body connection.
Yeah, that mental piece is, that's a hot subject now. Everybody is um, talking about the mental health of men. What do you think in this particular era, generation, is making it more comfortable for men to talk about their mental issues?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things. One, I think we're having more public conversations. If you think about 20 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, we didn't necessarily have the social media groups, the TikTok, the Facebook, the Instagram, all of the other ones. And so I think that there are lots of more public conversations being had about mental health. And I think that that is able to be consumed by individuals. So people are starting to question their own previous maybe biases or preconceived notions about what it means to ask for help, or what it means to have a mental health condition. I think some of that is also then starting to destigmatize mental health as an issue. I think you are seeing more individuals in the public world, whether it's in the sports industry. I've had peers that have worked in mental health spaces for the NBA, for NFL. So there's more conversations even within the sports and entertainment industry. We're starting to see actors and actresses and musicians talk about their own battles of depression or other types of mental health conditions. So I think there's a larger conversation being had, and it's more public.
Hmm.
I think that that's making some people feel a little bit more comfortable with then identifying with having an issue, problem, or concern.
Where do you start the pipeline, though? Where do you start the pipeline with respect to? I'm gonna put you in a lab and see how you function in this lab. So there's a classroom, senior classroom at one of the more prestigious high schools in the country. 30 students are in there with full ride scholarships to go to whatever institution and follow whatever career they want to follow. There's five of you in the hallway to go in and pitch to these high level students to get them to come into your profession. There's a lawyer, there's a sports person out there, a financial person out there, and a real estate person out there, and you. And you have to go in last. They all go in and do their pitches, and now you have to go in and you have to pitch to these 30 young minds about why your profession is a profession they should choose over those other four. What's your pitch?
That's a good question. Honestly, what I would say is that all of my four, I think it was four colleagues that went before me, they're all my clients.
There you go.
That's pretty much it. And I say that seriously because when I think about the work that I do, I mean, everyone deals with problems and concerns and issues, right? And, and I say that also in a way because we have these thoughts about what a person looks like who deals with mental health issues. But in actuality, we come in all shapes and sizes and colors and backgrounds. And in my work in particular, in my clinical practice, in addition to working a lot with fathers and with couples, I do work a lot with people who are in various types of professional industries because everyone's overwhelmed. Everyone's trying to figure it out. Everyone's trying to hold it together. And so, yeah, you may be a sports professional, and maybe the issues might be different or they may be similar, right? You might be a sports professional. You might come in because you might be dealing with depression. Maybe you're not on the winning team. Maybe it's time to transition out. Maybe you're dealing with the pressure of that, right? You're an attorney. You're dealing with similar types of things. You're trying to deal with work life balance while you have two kids at home and a wife and this and that. And so everyone deals with issues, problems, and concerns. And so in my profession, I get access to some of that, and I get to play a role in helping to improve people's mental health and to improve relationships. So that's sort of what I would say in terms of um, how I would sort of lead regarding my profession. I think one
Mhm.
of the things that's interesting, though, related to what you said, is when we think about some of the most popular, college majors, psychology is typically one of the popular majors. So everyone is already somewhat in tune with, wanting to sort of understand how people think, how people behave, and so being able to sort of leverage that as well, and recognizing that. Um, Everyone can deal with issues and problems and concerns at some point in their life. And this professional myself is someone here to address those issues when they come up.
Yeah, that was a damn good answer. I was like, okay, all right. So if I ever am on one of those shows and I need to call a friend, I'm gonna be calling you because you that was a quick response to that answer. I'll take a quick shift because I want to kind of move into this other space, that's related to the work that you're doing, particularly around family therapy. And within that, also is relationship and marriage and things of that sort, where there are folks that are now becoming more. We talked about men's struggle with recognizing their mental health. But I think the next step beyond that is this whole notion of now that I've recognized it, now I have to find somebody to go get therapy. Like that's a whole nother thing. Right. And when you talk about family therapy, moving on that side and moving forward, now you got to convince this whole, tribe that no, we need some help in helping someone help us to get through our issues. When you think about therapy in and of itself, like has that become more of the norm in our community than there used to be? Because I think the place for therapy for most of our community has been church.
Mhm. Yes, good question. I think I think that there has been some improvements, for sure, within the community as it relates to mental health treatment. But I also think that you are right in terms of historically, the mental health sort of ideas, perspectives have been rooted in the church. I think that there are, when I think about community, I also think about geographical differences. So I am located in Columbus, Georgia, where I live, and I know that you're right up the road. And essentially, and I remember you were down here recently, actually,
Mm-hmm.
and so when I think about my experience, my perspective being here in Columbus, Georgia, and even in Atlanta and things like that, and being part of the Bible Belt, I think there is more of a historical sort of perspective related to getting mental health, strength and nourishment, faith, and all of those things from the church. I have previously, several years ago, I lived on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And when I lived on the West Coast and I lived in the Bay Area, um, it was a very different perspective and different experience. I definitely think that people did rely on the church, but there's a different conversation about mental health that goes on the West Coast. And what I mean by that is, um, it seemed like it was very normalized on the West Coast. And I don't know, West Coast might be more progressive or whatever the case may be, but it seemed like everyone that I was meeting when I was in California, they talked about how they had a therapist. It was just so normal to talk about that. Whereas where I'm located now, people are going to therapy, but it's not such a public conversation, or a casual conversation that people would have among their friend groups. So I think there is some change that's happening, definitely, but I also think that a lot of strength historically has come from the Black church. Interestingly enough, one of the things that, because of that, one of the things that I have done historically, I've done some partnerships with faith based organizations to talk about how do we sort of bridge the gap between, religion and spirituality and mental health. And one of the ways to do that is to partner with faith based organizations, and to connect with pastoral leaders, because those are the people that are the key players, the key stakeholders in terms of trying to sort of have those conversations. So I've done some of that in my work, tried to connect with faith based organizations and try to create opportunities for conversation. So it's something that's being done. I think also you may be familiar. There's some research that's been done, also, in black barbershops around mental health initiatives. So there's conversations that are being had. I just hope that we continue to have more conversations.
Yeah, we need, there's this. I've been kind of like really kind of thinking about like where is our national convening where all of these minds come together and talk about like what's happening in our community. And I know that there are some conferences that take place out there, but I'm not. I always think that there's something missing. Like, and I don't know what it is. I haven't put my finger on it yet. That there's something missing, even when I go to some of these other conferences. And I'm glad you brought up Columbus because we are coming into Columbus. We're actually starting our first cohort of fathers out of Columbus in a couple of weeks. And so we're excited about that, expanding our federal grant into Columbus to begin to start doing some of our curriculum work and our work in Columbus and trying to establish our community relationships there, and trying to get into Fort Bennett. I want to get into the fort. I want to get into Fort Bennett because I want to see what that work looks like in this space, dealing with our veterans who are active veterans. What does this fatherhood marriage space? There's no other federal grantees around the country that's working on a military base. I want to be the first one to do that. So it's trying to find our way into that space. But having said that, Atlanta, Columbus, one of the other things that made me want to go there. First of all, we had some programming in Columbus around our Real Dads Read program and had books and barbershops around Columbus. But I've always wanted to come because I understand small town living, right? And so when you talk about the difference in how the West Coast and the East Coast sees therapy and mental health, I also thought that there's a stark difference between how urban centers and rural centers see see mental health. So my thought, so when you said that they are starting to sit, to me, it's like I thought that rural Black America would be the last space that would think about doing therapy, but you said that's not the case. What's happening in rural America that's allowing people to start to see that there is an additional piece of health that I need outside of my close church circle?
Yeah, I think historically, in addition to some of the stigma that has been around related to mental health, I think historically some of the other barriers has been related to access to care and to culturally competent care, or culturally responsive care. I think that, and so the people that have been traditionally in the rural areas have not had as much access to a lot of the treatment that might be available in the more urban communities. But one of the things that we know with, for example, the emergence of telehealth, right, that sort of came as a backdrop of the pandemic, there have been traditionally more opportunities to gain access to treatment than before. And so, of course, there could still be some barriers around access to the internet and things like that. But what we know is that, you know, due to the pandemic, and everyone sort of converting or at least creating more opportunities for access, virtually, it has actually opened up opportunities to where, for example, I'm here in Columbus, Georgia, but I have worked with clients in all parts of the state,
Mhm.
in places that I would have never even touched, if it was based on geographic location. So I think that the rural community, there are some emergence of opportunities specifically due to telehealth.
Mm. Yeah, telehealth. Previous board member, Dr. Jeff Gardia,
I know
was
him.
the first person that I heard the whole notion of telehealth from. He was talking to me about it during the pandemic. He was like, "Ken, I got something I want to share with you." And he's like, started going on and on about this telehealth. And I was like, yeah, in my mind, it was like, that ain't gonna work. And now that's the norm.
It
Like
is the
that.
norm.
But think about how quickly it happened. Like we talking less than 3 years. This thing have gone from like going to the doctors to now sitting in my home having a Zoom call meeting, with the doctor whenever I want, or emailing him through the telehealth system and talking to him and him filling my subscriptions. And not only that, all of my doctors are talking to each other in my record. My eye doctor, my dentist, my everybody, my sleep, everybody's in the same portal talking to each other.
Mhm.
And the thing I love about it is I don't have to fill out that 15-page questionnaire every time I go to the doctor because it's already in the system. So it's a cool thing to see. Are you doing any writing?
I am actually, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things. Uh, let me do the plug a little bit on my research project right now, and then I'll
Okay.
tell you a little bit about another project. So I am currently conducting a research project, and it is specifically related to transitioning to fatherhood, to Black fatherhood in particular. And so I have two students, Maddie and Sarah, who are assisting in this project. We are interviewing Black fathers, and we're asking them questions around what it was like to find out that you're going to have a child. We're asking questions about mental health. We're asking questions around how they have played a role in that process, the pregnancy process, the perinatal process, and really focusing in on what their needs are during that process. And I sort of talked about, when I talked about my sort of story, how important it is to sort of have these conversations. And so we're currently we're trying to do I think 45 interviews. We are halfway through, so we do have space for like 20, maybe 20 more. If anyone that's listening is interested, in particular, they have to have had a child between ages between 0 and 6 years of age now. Part of that is because we're trying to find out for those who have had a child earlier, what was it like navigating this during the pandemic, actually? What was it like trying to, go to a doctor's appointment or navigate that sort of process? So we're looking for people who have a child, 0 to 6 years of age, um, to answer some questions and participate in a video interview. Of course, that interview is it's anonymous. No one would know their real identity, and there is a stipend that they are able to receive as well for participation. So, of course, if anyone is interested in that, please reach out to me. I'd love to tell you more about it.
And you
Um,
sent me that. You sent me that information, right? I have it. I think I have it. If not, send it to me again so it floats back up to the top. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, when I get those kind of things, they settle in.
oh, I know.
I'll look at them and I'll read them, and so I just have my own particular criteria for giving people access to our fathers.
Oh,
And the number
absolutely.
one thing for me is value of time. And so when people say, I'm going to give you a gift certificate to Walmart for 20, not my fathers, you're not. Like you're going to value their time at the level that their time needs to be valued. And so in partnership sometimes, and I get it, we only have this much amount of money, blah, blah, blah. It's like, so let's talk because what I would rather do is let's partner. You put in half, I put in another half. We'll up the whatever it is so that their time is valued when they do that, so that my dads understand that you just don't let anybody come into your space and get your narrative and your story, that your story has value. That's kind of my principle with my organization. So oftentimes, a lot of times I get those things, they never see the light of day in my space, because folks are just like, no, well, so then you go somewhere else, because my dads are clear with understanding that when we deploy you into a space, we have ensured that your value is taken into consideration when you move into that space. So, yeah, send it to me, and then you and I can have a conversation about how we make that happen, because we do have a vast network of fathers that we move into those spaces to do that. I would love to support you in that space.
Appreciate that. Yeah, yeah, and I completely agree with everything that you mentioned and think it's extremely
Oh, and the
important.
other thing is, most people who come to me don't look like you.
That's what I was about to say. So that's what I was about to say. I was going to say I really do appreciate what you said, and I agree wholeheartedly because you do have to be a gatekeeper in many ways because if I was to even talk about historically, people of color and people from disenfranchised backgrounds have been oppressed and abused by researchers. So I'm very very clear about that when it comes to the work that I'm doing, and I also think that it is important that people. I think research can be done by anyone, but I think it's important that research is done by people who are part of the community as well, who have an invested interest in the research and the outcome, and also has a passion to do something with the research. Because a lot of research is just put out there, but it's about what is the implementation, what's the strategy, what's the intervention that we're going to take away from that. And so that is one of the things that is really important for me as a researcher, is not to just do the research, but to actually use it as a mechanism to help create change. Um, so I appreciate that. And the other thing I will say, it's a little preliminary, but I am writing. I'm in the editing process
Hmm.
of a book. I'll probably have to come back. Uh,
Get it done. What's it about? What's the
it's
story?
already
What's the
it's already done. It's just we're just editing it, but it's on Black Fatherhood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nah, I was gonna, I have friends in my circle that's always. I mean, now I'm into it. This has been years ago, so I literally just I'm gonna get your mailing address because I send out a little care package. But this is the book that this just got published this
Amazing.
week, and so but that's I think my 11th or 12th book. And so, but that one is the most significant because my first one was my autobiography. And then after that, the rest of them was children's books. And so this is like the first one that I've come back and actually begun to take this issue and story and put on paper. And I have a trilogy that I'm writing. So this is the first one. I have two others. And so once I write the next two, those 3 of them. I'm not writing anymore. Those 3 will become my life's work at that point, because it will kind of triangle my life in a way that I can have conversations about different aspects of who I am and what has contributed to my life, and how do I talk about all these things from different, perspectives. And so I'm excited about that. So I always encourage. I write, in fact, in I have like 3 sayings that I write in my autograph, but one of them is, "Your story is your superpower."
Mhm.
Right? It is your story, is your everything that you ever, all the power that you will ever amass in your life will come as a result of your story. And if you allow someone to take your story, you allow somebody to take your power. That's why I don't give my fathers over to people. It's like you control your narrative, you control your story, at every juncture, with respect to that. So yeah, so let's just stay in touch. Get this book done. Now that I know that you're writing a book, yeah, I'm pretty you're gonna hit me, yo. What's up with the book? What's up with the book? What's
Listen,
up with the book?
it is done. I am just doing the editing piece, and I mean we have a we have a deadline and things like that. So we'll hopefully I'll be able to come back and
Absolutely.
share.
Let me know as soon as it's out. And yes, flip me the manuscript so I can read it and get my head around it. And and I'll try not to. 'Cause I had a friend of mine to send me a book that he wrote, and I didn't talk to you about this. We have to talk about this when we come back with your books. I'm sure we'll be able, and hopefully you won't do this. But his title of the book had the term, fatherless in it, and I absolutely, I'm not going to say hate, I dislike that word. I'm opposed to that word, for a very simple reason. There is no such thing as a fatherless child. 100% of all biological children born on this earth has a father. The question isn't if he exists, the question is where he exists.
Mhm.
And so whenever I see that word, I don't like the permutation of that word, because it infers to a child that your father doesn't exist, and that's not true.
Mhm.
But when you tell them that, it expounds on this hole in their heart that they can't reconcile, because you told them that the thing that made it doesn't exist, so they don't know where to turn,
Mhm.
right? And so fatherlessness, which is the word you're using, speaks to absence, doesn't speak to the absence of a father. It speaks to absence of his presence.
Mhm.
And absence looks the same between a father who only has 50% custody and a father who travels 50% of the time. Both children are experiencing 50% absence of their childhood, and those absences show up the same way in their adulthood. We have to get
But
our
we don't
heads.
talk about it the
Yes.
same, and I think that's part of the problem.
We have to, but that changes our narrative when we start thinking,
Mhm.
which is why our voices, why when you say you're writing your book, yes, you got to write your book because we need your voice in the space. And so, yeah, there's 1,000 books out there around Black fatherhood right now. The thing that pains me the most is that brothers write these books and then they don't advance their voices in the space. They write the book looking for sales, as opposed to writing the book looking to advance your voice,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And so, even if your sales are at 0, that doesn't stop you from advancing your voice,
Mhm.
because when you advance your voice, you'll notice that your sales go up.
Yes, sir.
Your book is not your voice. Your voice is your book. Your book is your book is a representation of your voice. It's not your voice.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it doesn't speak until you speak. Right. And so my encouragement to you is, when you put it out there, now you have a responsibility to have your voice continue to push your book, not to wait for your book to pull your voice. It doesn't work like that.
Sure. Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if we can have this conversation that we're having with more brothers and sisters, people in general, write your story and then move your subject matter into the space so it can move the space.
Mhm.
right? And so that's my frustration, and that's when I get the trilogy of this. But that's really why I wrote this one first, Too Seasoned to Care, because the subtitle is How Aging Turns Experience into Wisdom and Liberation. That something happens when you begin to start, when the gray shows up. You start caring less about how people think about you and what people say about you, and you start speaking more from your heart than from your head.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
I hear that.
people can't handle heart conversation. They can handle head conversation because you're little, like when you went in to speak to the students, like you went in with some of your heart, but a lot of your head. When you go in there with your heart, you start off with, well, first of all of them are my clients. Let's start there. Because everybody else came in with, oh yeah, you're gonna make a lot of, they come in with the head count. You coming in like, yeah, well, that's good. But yeah, I'll see you at 3 on Thursday. I'll see you at 2 on Friday. I'll see all of y'all. All of y'all eventually will end up coming to me. That's coming from the heart, And so I think that when we talk about the disconnect between our community, which is these silos where we're only hearing the men's health conversation, the women's health conversation, and then in the spaces where we're talking about children, is because there's this internal um, motivation to be in those silos because of the heart. But the conversations that occur when you in there is only about the head. Because if
Mm,
you were speaking from the heart, you would want to ensure that the other two compartments was a part of your conversation.
100%.
Yeah. So that's my soapbox for today, Dr. Moore. Listen, I appreciate you, sir. Love that conversation. I can't wait. Make sure you get me that information so that we can figure out and connect you. And then how we, as we come into Columbus, how we may partner in Columbus to really kind of expand the work there. Because Columbus is a different space. It ain't Atlanta.
That's true. It is not Atlanta.
Columbus is not Atlanta. And so we're walking slowly. We ain't trying to come in like big kid from that, because I know that there's a reaction to Atlanta in Columbus. When you mention Atlanta and Columbus, I've seen it several times where I said, there's somebody said, where you come? You from Atlanta? Like their whole demeanor kind of changes a little bit. It's like, listen, I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I know that don't make it any better for this conversation, but I'm also from a small town. My family's from a small town in North Carolina, so I know small town living. I know what rural living looks like. And so, but I'm also trying to help my people. And I'm not going to allow you to be a block between what the people need and where the people can get it from, because you have another philosophy about where they get it from. We can't control our community. We have to lead our community.
Absolutely. And let me go on the record to say I live in Columbus, Georgia, but I am not from Columbus, Georgia. Uh,
Oh,
so I'm originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
okay. How'd you get to Columbus?
Yeah, that's the whole story. But I
Yeah.
ended up going to school in South Georgia and met my wife, who's from Columbus. But
Nice.
I say that to say, I mean, Minneapolis is a whole other conversation, but there's a conversation that needs to be had too when it comes to this topic, even there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And to all of my I Am Dad podcast listeners, you know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you are kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good friend and mentor Art Mitchell always said to me, Kenny, it's nice to be important, but you know what? It's much more important to be nice. Till next Sunday, be safe. God bless, and peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am dad, period.